Alrighty, Madam Chairman, we are ready whenever you are.
Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the second day of our Senate Education Committee. Happy to have you all here and on a windy, blustery day in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Shock. Anyway, before we get started, I think Senator Scott is on the way, but we're going to go ahead and get started because I know that Senator Landon's got to get to another meeting. So anyway, let's go ahead and take roll. Ashley?
Absolutely, Madam Chairman. For roll call for Senate Education on January 17th, 2025, Senator Brennan.
Here.
Senator Olson.
Here.
Senator Rothfuss. Senator Scott.
Excused?
Chairwoman Schuler.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, Ashley. All right, our first bill today is Senate File 34, School Finance, Routine, and Major Maintenance Calculations. It was sponsored by the Select Committee on School Facilities, and I believe we have a couple of representatives here from school facilities that are going to lead us forward on this bill. So with that, we'll turn the time over to you folks, and even though we know you both, please introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Dale McComey. I'm the Director for the State Construction Department.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm your colleague from the Wyoming State Senate, and glad to be here this morning to represent this bill and some of the work that we've done over the past interim. Really glad that the Director of State Construction is with us this morning. He, of course, is the expert, but also happy to know that Senator Rothfuss is here. Together, Senator Rothfuss, I think you and I have served on this select committee for school facilities for well over a decade, probably. It's been kind of a labor of love, but it's also a labor that represents work like this when sometimes we bring policy considerations for the Education Committee and the Senate as a whole, considerations that are tough to get your arms around, and that's what this bill represents. About 2017-18, and again, the director can help us with details and hone in on specific dates, but we began to study this whole major maintenance picture. And frankly, Madam Chairman, we have not been taking care of our buildings out there. We have over 25 million square feet of school facilities buildings out across our state. We either maintain them. It's kind of like the commercial from years ago. You either pay now or you're going to pay a lot later. We have, so that's why just about every session, the School Facilities Select Committee has brought to your attention the need to kind of ratchet that up. Well, that's what this bill proposes to do. There are formulas in the way that we take care of our buildings. For a little history lesson, on page 5 of this bill, you will be able to see exactly where it used to be and where we are now. Beginning years ago, we used to reimburse the school districts out across the state based on their square footage. Many of those districts, however, had a lot of square footage above and beyond, what our models allow for. And that coupled with the downturn in about 2015, we stopped spending very much money on school buildings. You might remember, even if you weren't in the legislature at that time, we stopped building any buildings on capital construction, and we ratcheted down what we pay on routine maintenance and major maintenance. So that's what's reflected in this bill, Madam Chairman. That's the kind of the 30,000-foot view. We have ratcheted down through the years, and what this bill proposes to do is to ratchet those two amounts back up some. The routine maintenance is in the bill, and the major maintenance is in the bill. You'll hear about 115% for the routine maintenance. We suggest that we go to 135. 2.0 for the major maintenance. We suggest that we go to 2.5, and we can talk about what that means. So Madam Chairman, that's kind of the 30,000-foot view. I'll stop there. I'm here just because I want to be sure to answer any questions or have any conversation you'd like to have on this bill. We can get into the detail with the director and with any of you.
Questions for Senator Landon? I just have one, Senator, just, again, the criteria that you use to decide how to go up from 115% to 135 and 2.0 to 2.5, you know, how did you get to those? I mean, I'm positive you didn't just grab them out of the air and say, hey, let's bounce this up and see what happens. So could you give us a little more background on that?
Madam Chair, Dale McComey, Director for State Construction Department. When I came to the Select Committee last year and proposed that we take another look at this, we spent a lot of time on this back in 17, 18 timeframe with some studies from consultants. And having retired, and then I went out and worked for the private consultants for 4 years before the governor asked me to come back. And a lot of the work that I did in the private industry was dealing with building maintenance, routine maintenance, put together strategic plans, things like that. And when we look at what we do on the state side for buildings, we look at the actual square footage of the whole building, and the major maintenance is based on the actual square footage of the whole building. On the school side, we kind of sort of do that, but we don't. What we do is we take the overall square footage of the building, and then we take the average daily attendance, the ADM, and we utilize how many students are in the building, and then we use that multiplier at 2%, and that comes up in the formula as to what how we calculate how much money the districts get for major maintenance. So let's just take example of a brand new school. We designed that brand new school so that the day it opens, it's at 90% capacity or maybe a little bit less. So that means because of the 90% on a brand new school meeting our criteria, so it's sized right, we would only provide 90% of the major maintenance funding for that school as compared to we would if we opened up, say, the Thyra Thompson building, where we look at the total square footage of that building.
90% right off the bat.
Yeah, right off the bat. And so as student populations fluctuate up and down, and we have some schools in this district here that are at 50% capacity in that school, we're only funding 50% of the major maintenance that we would comparable to, again, a state building or a building in private sector, what the private sector does. And so when I came back as director, I thought, you know, we need to tackle this issue again, because one of the other salient points of this study back in the 2017-18 timeframe was that if we continue to defer maintenance at the 2%, and at the time that's what was there, the current formula we're using, that in the long run, when we look at the lifespan of the buildings, we're probably cutting short the life expectancy of a building by about 20 years compared to what we're currently funding it at. And then on top of that, that increases then that lifespan shortening, increases the capital construction budget because we're going to be building more schools sooner. That overall, if I recall, the numbers was approximately $3 billion over a 50-year lifespan for the state of Wyoming. $3 billion increased over if we increased it to the 2.56. Now, where the 15% comes from is we have excess square footage, as the senator described earlier. We have a lot of these older buildings in the state, school buildings, have what we consider to be excess square footage. So we come in, we take their floor plan, the department does, we look at their overall square footage, we look at the size of the rooms and how many students it can hold. And so two prime examples right now on buildings that we're going to spend about $150 million to replace are the Rock Springs High School and the Campbell County High School. Both of those have approximately 100,000 square feet of excess capacity. 100,000. So when we're looking at building those right now through the Mercer studies, those are going to be in the 200,000 square foot realm versus the 300. But because that's excess capacity, just like we build it for the 90% You have we don't accommodate those schools for that excess square footage. So what does that do? That means the life cycle of those buildings is gonna turn over quicker, and here we are today with trying to replace these buildings at 50 years old. They've been on the radar for, I don't know, 10 years or something, to be replaced already. And they're both about 52, 53 years old. We would like to see anywhere between 65 and 75 years out of a building. And so this funding will allow us to have increase the life expectancy. So the 115%, back when the early 2000s, when the commission was formed, the School Facilities Commission, we were looking at a 200% number instead of the 115. And then it got ratcheted down, and I think it went to 155, then it went to 135, now down to 115. And the reason for that is the state wanted the school districts to look at their overall portfolio and try to reduce this excess square footage. And that is occurring here in just the last year or so, last 2 years. In Natrona County, for example, I think they've taken about 5 elementaries offline. We're looking at taking, Riverton's taken a couple off. We're looking in this district to take off about 8 elementary schools in the next 10 years offline. So that formula is working. So when we got together, my original proposal to the commission, or to the committee, was to just look at the overall square footage. We had a lot of discussion on that, looked at the original formulas. There was a concern that if we just looked at the overall square footage, how would that affect some of the smaller districts that had very few buildings? Would that constitutionally fit? We didn't have an answer at that time, so we looked at, well, let's just stay within the realm of where we're at today and utilize that formula. So the committee said, okay, let's move to the 2.5, which was supported through studies back in the 17-18 timeframe, and then ratchet back up from the 150 to the 135. And interestingly enough, those numbers that are in here for the increase are almost identical from doing that overall square footage versus how we would move this now. And so I think that's kind of long and short of the history of it, but that's kind of how we do the measurements today, and my office calculates those major maintenance payments.
Other questions? Yes, Senator Scott.
Madam Chairman, I'm hearing persistent rumors, not documented reports, but rumors, that some of the school districts, not all, but some, are diverting major maintenance funds to other purposes that they have within the school districts. What kind of controls do we have on that? What's the penalty for doing that, or is there one?
Yeah, Madam Chair.
John, go ahead.
On major maintenance, I don't believe that's happening because we do have a tight control. We automatically send out the payments to the districts, but before they can expend any of those funds, they have to come to us and tell us what they're gonna fund with that. And our project managers oversee that, and we make a call as to whether or not they can or they cannot. And we track that funding on major maintenance on a yearly basis. There's what they call the 680 report, that the districts have to come in and provide an audit trail every year as to how they're spending that money. The only concern, I guess, on how they're spending some of the major maintenance out there, and again, it's going to the school building, but is perhaps on some of the remodeling that's going on versus having, working on components of the building. But we do track that, and I'll let you know right now in this district, they want to remodel McCormick Junior High. And so, and it's an older building, they're calling it a midlife remodel, and do some major work on the rooms, the walls, the components, the doors, the windows, on that. And so before I would sign off on them to use that major maintenance to be able to do that, I said, I want you to come to me, because we have identified in the latest building assessments, the FCA that we did statewide, so the Facility Condition Index for a building that identifies all those needs for the next 25 years coming up on components that we would look for major maintenance to take care of. And I said, I want you to provide me with a plan that shows how you're gonna take care of those identified items for the next 5 years between the current money you have now and what you'll have coming forward. And they did that, and so I signed off on them to go and do this larger project with their major maintenance funds. A lot of the smaller districts don't accrue enough money to be able to do that. They're more just singular on component funding. Some of your larger districts, because of just the sheer size of the amount that they have in the district. But again, that money is going only to things that are eligible for major maintenance funding in that building.
So, Madam Chairman, just
Go
to
ahead.
tack on a little bit for the senator, there are natural stresses in how we operate with school facilities. Anytime the funding comes from the state and down to the districts, there's always a tug and pull, and when we come down to the legislature, we always have these kind of conversations about, well, are the districts taking care of things the way we expect them to take? We've really worked hard the last decade, in particular, to come up with systems like the director just explained to us. So I am confident that our districts are doing everything they can with this maintenance money. Where you come into question marks is when you have very old buildings. And, sometimes our districts are criticized for not taking care of a building, but sometimes that's because that's a building that is targeted soon to be replaced. Well, at that point in time, there are decisions to be made with regarding how much more you want to put into a building like that. Now, the flip side of the coin is places like Washakie 2, where up in Tent Sleep, here about 10 years ago, we had a conversation. That was a building that was built in 1931, I believe, and it just never came on the radar screen. And yet you had to duck down in the basement level to not hit your head. And when I have to do that, that means it's a pretty short door. So they had done such a great job of taking care of that building that it lasted that long. But then it was time. And I'm glad to say that here about a week ago, we opened a brand new school up at Tent Sleep. And so lots of things to consider. Anytime you got 48 school districts and all of that square footage, the director does a remarkable job of keeping pretty close track of where that money's going. So hope that helps, and be glad to answer any other questions.
Other questions, committee? Just to tag on to Senator Scott's question, I just was thinking in terms of, let's just say a school district has expended their maintenance money. They have some kind of a disaster like a roof leak or something like that. Can they come back to the school facilities, or do they have to take that out of their general fund?
Madam Chair, we have two methodologies to work on that. So one of the things we're actually doing right now, and it was, we discussed it with House Appropriations yesterday, was what they term component projects. And we've gone in again through the studies that we did on the buildings in the last year and a half. And we've gone through every building and by district to analyze what work is being forecasted to come up. And within that, then we've looked at how much major maintenance they're gonna have in the next, how much they currently have and how much they'll accrue in the next 3 years, and see what that discrepancy is. And there are some, I think the highest district we had, they have actually 400% more needs than they have major maintenance money available. And so we then, through the select committee, look at component projects. And so we're trying to address those larger things within the building to try and get them to a 1-to-1 ratio. We have 100%, we know what's coming, and we have enough money to do that. And that's the focus of the target in our bill this year. And then additionally to that, there are times that things crop up. It doesn't happen every year, kind of seems to go in spurts. There's some years we don't have any emergency funding requests, and there's other years that we do. We have a pot for the commission and myself to to work with the districts on emergency repairs. And then when that pot kind of deplenishes down, we come to the select committee and ask for some additional funding to put some money back in that pot.
Thank you. Other questions or comments, committee? Okay. Well, thank you so much for your testimony. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anyone?
Madam Chair,
Yes,
one other,
go ahead.
WDE has an appropriations meeting today. So they asked me to cover it within the bill. You'll see, let me see which page it is. There's a $5.5 million add-on besides the money that would come for major maintenance. And that's to routine maintenance that goes through the block grant. And that 5.5 million, it's on the line 17 and 18 of page 6. And so the formula that is used for the routine maintenance is similar. So when we go from the allowable square footage, that would increase the amount that would go to the districts for routine maintenance by that 5.5 million.
Thanks for that clarification. I actually had that circled. I was probably going to ask about it and I just forgot, so thanks for that clarification. Any other questions or comments? Okay, thanks again for your testimony, appreciate it.
Madam Chairman, thank you. I'm going to run to the other committee and glad to help out or answer any questions. I've got a lot of material I'd be happy to share with any one of you, and obviously Senator Rothfuss has been on that select committee for a long time, so.
Well, thank you for
Thank you.
coming and taking the time, and we'll probably, if this moves forward, probably need you to back us up.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it, Madam
Thanks so
Chairman.
much. All right, anyone from the public that would like to testify on this bill? Please come forward and introduce yourself. Welcome.
Good morning. I am Nick Bellack. I'm with the Wyoming School Boards Association. I'm going to be very brief today, but I'd like to talk in favor of this bill. When we talk about preserving assets, adequate funding to preserve those assets is of paramount importance. We're absolutely understanding that it is our responsibility to maximize the lifespan of the buildings. And I'll give a personal anecdote. My first job, actually in high school, was as a maintenance plumber worker for a school district. And I truly understand that the maintenance that you put into those buildings, the schedule of maintenance and making sure that they're done correctly and the funds to adequately allow those to happen really does increase the lifespan of those buildings. So it's really putting money back into your pocket. So just a personal anecdote and just a note of support, and I'll stand for any questions.
Okay, questions? Anyone? Okay, thanks so much for your testimony. Appreciate it. Anyone else that would like to testify from the public on this bill? Do we have anybody online, Ashley?
No, Madam Chairman.
Okay. All right. If there's no other public testimony, we'll go ahead and close public testimony. What's your pleasure, committee? Move the bill by Senator Olson. All right. Thank you for the second. We can just take a look at it, see if there's anything within the bill that you have issues with or amendments for.
Madam Chairman,
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Senator.
the appropriation of the, not the 5 million, but the, is it 38 million? The language there is that that's for major maintenance payments made necessary by the amendments enacted to this. So am I correct in reading that? And maybe Senator Rothfuss would know. Am I correct in reading that the overall appropriation is much, much larger than that?
Senator Rothfuss, do you have some history on that?
Madam Chairman, it's going to be an ongoing appropriation, and the bulk of it is the shift from the 2% to the 2.5% major maintenance is the bulk of that 38 million. So this plays out the period from July 1st, 2025 to the 30th, 2026. And then if that moved forward in the next budget, you would effectively be doubling that number, I believe. Is that doubling the number? I guess I'll look to make sure that that's roughly where it would be to Dell.
Go ahead,
Thank-
Director.
Yep, thank you, Madam Chair. I think, yes, I think that's correct. So we had the 38 million, I think it was roughly the first year, then it went to a little over 40, and then it went to like 43 the third year. The reason for the increases is we're factoring in, one of the components that goes into the calculation is the current replacement value, what we refer to as the CRV for the buildings. And we're looking at, we went back over the last 5 years and see what inflation has been doing to us. And that increase, and that's averaged about 4.6% per year. So that's kind of where that number comes from. And this is, so typically this major maintenance request comes in our annual budget request, and then we true it up. So again, this year we're asking for a $2 million increase because of inflation and calculations, number of students, buildings coming offline, online, those sort of things. And so we've got a $2 million request this year, and that is part of our standard budget, where our typical CapCon are one-time funds, but major maintenance is part of the department's standard budget on the school side.
And I guess for clarity for Senator Scott, what's the total single year major maintenance budget?
We're at about 100, I think with this 2.2, we'd be at about 178 million for the biennium,
For the biennium?
for the biennium,
Yeah.
yes.
So you can see the relative increase. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
Yeah.
That answer your question, Senator Scott?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Other questions from the committee? Thank you for that, Director. Okay.
And Madam Chairman, just one other background point that didn't come up by the discussion. We have chronically underfunded major maintenance in 3 different ways. So we've underfunded the percentage for the replacement concept, so that's the 2%, where the report and work we did back in 2017 and 18, as Mr. McComey noted, provided us with an optimal of around 2.74, I think was the number that came out of it, as the most cost-effective major maintenance percentage when you incorporate the major maintenance versus the replacement timeline. When you take both of those into consideration, the most cost-effective over, an infinite future was like that 2.74%. This is asking for 2.5%. So we've chronically underfunded that relative to what should have been done. On the square footage, which this bill also addresses, we've underfunded that because we haven't been funding all of the square feet. And as we all know that, even if you cut the number of students in the building by 20%, the building size regrettably does not miraculously shrink to fit that 20% decrease in students. So we've underfunded the square footage for quite a few years now. We funded it fully back more than 20 years ago, but we've scaled that down, and so we haven't funded all of the square footage. But the third area is kind of the last point, talking about the current replacement value of the buildings. We use an RS means estimated calculation of what it would cost to fully replace a building, and then the percentage is based on that. We couldn't, for anything in the universe, build a new building for RS means costs. We're probably not even hitting 150% of RS means cost at this point in time. We would aspire to build a building for 150% of the current replacement value that we're using. So we're using a very unrealistic number as the replacement value that then we're multiplying the 2% by. So that leads to a rather significant underfunding of major maintenance over the years. And again, the challenge with why we haven't passed this in the past is always that you look at this as an appropriation this year. The reality is we have a fleet of schools. There's a tremendous expense associated with that fleet of schools. And it is just as, I believe, good Senator Landon talked about, right? We can pay a little now, or we can pay a lot later. You know as well as I do, the legislature is famous for paying a little now and then paying a lot later. because it's a lot easier on our 2-year time frame where our window of view of the future of the state of Wyoming is a number slightly less than 2 years, depending on how late into a term we are. And that's what's led to, honestly, us having to replace a lot of buildings and having major component crises and other problems. If we had invested along the way, it would have cost us far less in terms of the replacement costs of these schools, and we could have renovated much more easily. And then the final point, which isn't in this bill, but there's a lot more discussion on renovation going on, which seems to now be shifting in the market, where we're looking at renovating schools around the state more than replacing schools. And this approach of ensuring our major maintenance is sufficient is going to help a lot in allowing us to renovate instead of replace, because hopefully the bones of the building will not be rubbish at that point. And, that's one of the problems we're seeing, obviously, up in Campbell County right now with the high school, is the entire plumbing infrastructure is a challenge. And there are a lot of aspects of that building where if there had been robust major maintenance that had been sufficient for the entire building, we might not have to replace it, although it would still be dramatically oversized. So those are my thoughts that weren't necessarily clear from some of the prior testimony. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. That gives me a really good, I think, feel for this bill and why you've come up with, or, the committee has come up with the formulas. Other comments or other things in the bill that anyone has any concerns with? Any amendments?
Madam Chairman? My apologies. There was one more thing that I did forget to mention that I don't think came up. The 135% versus the 115 is probably still insufficient, to be clear. When we were looking at the data, if you wanted to cover all square footage, that number would go up to about 200%. That would cover every district in the state, would then shift from a district that is provided a major maintenance distribution due to square footage versus due to ADM. But it really just came down to the committee picking a point of compromise where there still is pressure, where if you've got too many square feet, it's an inefficient system for you, and so there's pressure on a large square footage. But recognizing that even districts that you look at and you say, wow, they don't seem to be operating significantly over square footage and they still don't have enough major maintenance, it picks them up too. So the 135 wasn't magical. It realistically should probably be greater than that, but you can see clearly that you increase that number, you increase the dollars. It's pretty straightforward. And that was the number that the select committee settled on effectively as a reasonable, this is going to help a lot, but it doesn't necessarily remove the constraints. So I wanted to point that out. And we do have all of the data, and I should make sure that the whole education committee gets that data that we looked at that shows exactly what the costs are associated with what percentage and which districts or what percentage of districts are then completely covered by it. And I'll circulate that.
Madam Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, Mr. Wilmarth has sent out the major maintenance information that the select committee received over the interim, so you have that in your inbox.
Perfect, and that's
Thank
what I
you.
was referring to, so,
Perfect.
yeah, and Mr. Wilmarth is always exceptional at that. He's always listening, always lurking, and
It's kind of like Big Brother.
and providing the information we need before I ask for it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Matt.
Great, thank you for that, Ashley, and thank you, Senator. Anything else, any other comments? All right, let's go ahead then and take roll.
Madam Chairman, on Senate File 34, School Finance Routine and Major Maintenance Calculations do pass. Senator Brennan?
Aye.
Senator Olson?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss? Senator Scott? Chairwoman Schuler?
Hi,
5 aye.
thank you, Ashley. So that bill, Senate File 34, has passed, and I'm guessing that maybe Senator Rothfuss would be happy to, you've got so much, all right, you've got so much institutional knowledge, I'd hate to have one of the rest of us take a stab at it, so thank you. All right, moving on, our next bill for consideration is my bill, Senate File 44. And if you're all okay, I'll just stay here or would it be better if I go out front? What do you guys prefer? Okay, great. So Senate File 44, Fairness in Sports, Intercollegiate Athletics. Again, I brought this, from concerns that I had with folks that were seeing some issues that we were having with our college women athletes, not only in the Mountain West, but just various parts of the country. And so I actually started out visiting with one of our folks across the hall. We started to work a little bit on a bill together. And as time went on, I just decided that I would do something separate because I feel like this, we didn't need to really amend the other bill that we passed a couple of years ago that banned trans athletes from competing in grades 7 through 12, and I didn't want to really mess with that bill at all. So I said, I'm going to look around and see what's out there. And I found a bill that Texas had done, and theirs was similar to ours. They went ahead and passed some legislation that just dealt with middle school, high school, and then later on they came back and said, well, we need to go ahead and deal with our collegiate athletes as well. Originally, when I first brought the legislation a couple years ago, I actually had included the collegiate athletes. And in visiting with our UW folks and also some of our community college people, they said, let's hold off and see if the NCAA and the NJCAA will do something about the situation, and let's just, let them take care of it. Well, they really didn't. All the NCAA did actually was just say, well, we'll let each sport decide what they're going to do, and it was mainly as a result of the issues with Leah Thomas and the swimming. They really kind of passed the buck. And again, we had some situations in our own conference this year where University of Wyoming and some other schools in the conference chose to forfeit some games as a result of their athletes not wanting to compete against a trans athlete. And so anyway, I thought, well, let's go ahead and take a stab at it. And again, I visited with some of the college folks and made sure that they were okay with where I was headed. And so if you want to take a look at the bill, it's fairly simple. It just requires students at the University of Wyoming and Wyoming Community Colleges to compete in intercollegiate athletic competitions based on their biological sex. And over on page 2, it basically just says in section B that no educational institution shall allow a student to compete in an athletic competition sponsored or authorized by the educational institution that is designated for the sex opposite to the student's sex. There's a few other little issues there. There's, it's interesting that I left in this section C, Texas actually put this in there, and I didn't really think about it, but it does say that if there is a sport that is designated for male students, but they don't have a sport that would be designated for female students that was not offered or available, they could also compete. And I've talked to some people and asked if that would be something that people would push back on, and they said no. If University of Wyoming didn't have a female golf team, but they had a male golf team, and a female wanted to go ahead and compete, no worries, because again, the safety issue doesn't come into effect, the fairness issue doesn't come into effect. Physically, your females are not going to be able to outdrive, your male golfers and that sort of thing. So it doesn't really rise to the level of an unfair playing field. So on down on page 3, basically they determine the sex. It's correctly stated on the student's official birth certificate or another government record that accurately states that at birth. The very bottom of the page, section E, no educational institution shall retaliate against a person for reporting a violation of this section. And then on the last page, a person could have a private civil cause of action against an educational institution for any violation. So that's it pretty much in a nutshell. Again, I was asked by a couple people, well, do you know if we actually have some trans athletes that are competing, at Western Wyoming or Central or University of Wyoming? And I don't know. But I will say the same thing I said, when we passed the legislation for our high school kids. At that time, we had a handful. So there may be some out there that I'm not aware of. I don't know. But basically what this does, it just it just protects those biological female athletes, not only with the safety issues, but just the fairness issues. And, there's possibly going to be, there could be some federal legislation that comes down the pike later on that may just make this whole thing moot. I don't know. But rather than just sit around and wait and see if that happens, I just felt like we should probably go forward with this. And again, we just need to make sure that our biological female athletes have every opportunity to compete on a level playing field where they're safe, where it's fair. And we just need to safeguard the integrity of women's sports. And that's really the bottom line. So with that, I would open it up for questions from the committee. Yes, go ahead, Senator.
So I do have a couple, and the first comes down to, the title gets to intercollegiate athletics and a suggestion that it's related to college competition. But when you read the definition on page 2 of athletic competition, it seems incredibly broad, such that it would even include intramurals or club teams or any other organization associated with the university or the community college. Which is, well, I'll just ask, which is it? Is it intended to be organized collegiate competition through something such as the NCAA? Or is it also to include, every aspect from the top down that occurs at a university or college?
Thank you, Senator. That's an excellent question. I thought about that when I was looking at the definitions. My intention was strictly just the collegiate competition through the NCAA. I don't know that we need to really anticipate seeing those issues in intramurals or those kinds of things. I don't know that definition really gets us where we need to go. So that's something that maybe we should take a look at amending.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman, because I don't think it captures that, the title captures it, but then reading the definitions, it certainly seems more extensive. And I see words like contest and exhibition and performance as well. And I was going to ask why those are there. I mean, I think of a performance, I think of, and I've heard in other states, cheerleading as an example. I don't know why this would affect cheerleading, but I've heard other places it does end up affecting cheerleading. I don't think that's the intent. They're not competing, and in fact, there doesn't seem to be any fairness or risk, injury, whatever concerns there. So, but my assumption then is this is the definition then from Texas legislation.
Yes.
And- Okay,
Thank
but
you,
that's
Senator.
not
That-
the intent. Okay.
No, my intent is strictly the NCAA athletic competition situations, and yeah, but again, I did look at that, and I thought to myself that maybe needs to be amended.
Okay.
And maybe we can do that either committee of the whole or I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, but good point.
And the other question I
Yes.
had, Madam Chairman, on getting to that C paragraph, which you highlighted, this is on page 3, about allowing a female student to compete in an athletic competition that is designated for male students. I do question, from a safety and fairness standpoint, I can see where there may not be concern, but from an equal protection constitutional standpoint, it does seem like you're creating a clear gender bias through statute. And typically that would be if you write any law that provides a right to one gender and specifically excludes another gender, I would think that would be prima facie discriminatory. How has Texas handled this? Is this something that has seen a lawsuit in Texas? Is this going through their system?
Thank you for the question, Senator. No, actually, I don't think they've had anything that I'm aware of that litigated with this bill as of yet, but I think they just signed it in 2023, so it hasn't been around the block very long. But I did kind of just kind of questioned that one, and I debated whether that, I should like leave it in or take it out, and I would be okay with a friendly amendment to take it out. I'm not married to that section C at all. So-
Yeah, and Madam Chairman, a specific example at the University of Wyoming would be if, and we have plenty of male soccer players, but we have no men's soccer team. And if a male soccer player read this and said, hey, I want to play soccer at the University of Wyoming, I'm going to bring a challenge, it seems like they would have grounds to have some concern there. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's all I have for now. Thank you,
Okay.
Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Senator Scott.
Madam Chairman, frankly, on the issue we were just talking about, I think we're fine the way the bill is written. I don't think the courts will get confused on that one. But my question is, when you're talking about the no educational institution shall allow, so the community colleges and the university are not going to allow these things. Suppose they get a team in, not a Wyoming team, but the team they're competing against brings in somebody that violates this. Does this give the university any control over that, or is that beyond our ability?
Thank you, Senator Scott, for that question. That's a conversation that I've had with a couple of the administrators in both the community colleges and UW. And I think we just wanted to focus mainly on our area and not worry so much about those coming in. Again, hoping that maybe the NCAA will do something about it nationwide, or maybe our new administration might do something about it. So I know, or excuse me, I think the legislation that might be coming from the other side of the hall possibly may get to that point, but I didn't want to really go into that because I felt like that may end up hurting some of our athletes, because just like with the forfeit that our volleyball team took, that had to hurt those folks that chose not to play. I mean, I understand it, and I think everyone should stand up for what they think is right. But again, that's one competition, actually 2 times that they didn't get to compete because they would have been competing against a team that had a trans athlete. So I didn't delve into that, even though there may be some other legislation coming that will.
Madam Chairman, my question is, if we pass this, will this authorize the university to tell somebody else that's coming in, if you bring that athlete, they cannot compete here against state law?
Senator, the way that this is put together, I don't believe it does.
Okay,
But
that's the
I
question.
believe that the institutions themselves maybe possibly could make some rules themselves to address that, but this bill is in its format right now does not. So, good question. Other questions? Other comments? Okay. Well, let's go ahead and move on to public testimony then. Those would like to compete, or excuse me, not to compete. You don't have to compete today. We'd love to hear from you. Please introduce yourself.
This is for the tall people chair right here. Madam Chair,
It's usually on the right side. Right side, and you have to kind of sit up.
nothing. Okay, it's a
stand
trick
up.
chair.
Well,
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. Dickie Shaner here speaking on behalf of State Superintendent Degenfelder. She is in support of this bill.
thank you. Questions for Mr. Shaner? Okay, thanks so much. Go ahead and introduce yourself, sir.
My name is Dr. Rich Guggenheim. I'm the Director of Legislation for a nonprofit organization called Gays Against Groomers. We're an organization of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people, and we are here to speak out from within the community and ask for a yes vote on Senate File 44, the Fairness in Sports and Intercollegiate Athletics. As a proponent of Colorado's ballot initiative 160, Save Girls Sports, I travel to every one of Colorado's 64 counties speaking on this issue. Gender ideology is not what it is packaged and sold as. It is not inclusive, it is not fair, It is not about equality. Under the guise of being inclusive of transgender people and sensitive to the feeling of men, women have had their freedoms and their opportunities infringed upon and stolen. Men who approximate women are appropriating their rights and colonizing their spaces. Women are being deprived of their right to privacy and a safe, fair place to compete. Their opportunities to learn important life skills, develop healthy relationships with others, and foster a sense of belonging and self-worth are part of the experience of female athletics. This is destroyed when they are told they are no longer allowed to have these safe spaces and must welcome men who feel a certain kind of way. They are deprived of medals, awards, scholarships, academic opportunities, and as a result, career and economic opportunities, which are lost. They are deprived of opportunity costs, and the tangible, emotional, and psychological harm is also done. While some may ask how we will police and enforce this and who will check genitals, the reality is a simple DNA test will tell us who is a man and who is a woman. Yes, a simple cheek swab will help us determine a fair and equitable path forward for women's sports. Because as a molecular biologist, I can tell you, XY don't lie. The bottom line is that men do not belong in women's sports. Allowing men in women's sports is not inclusive. It is not equality. That is why I'm asking for you to vote yes on Senate File 44 and protect female athletics, just as Title IX requires. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Guggenheim? Okay, thanks so much for your testimony. Go ahead, please introduce yourself.
Hello, thank you, Chairwoman and committee. My name is Erin Lee. I'm a mother of 3 from Wellington, Colorado, just 10 miles south of the border. My family's here in Cheyenne. 3 years ago, my 12-year-old daughter was secretly transitioned to a boy in a secret gender and sexuality club in her public school, causing unthinkable harm to her and to our family. I've since woken up to the harms being caused to women and girls by pushing gender ideology, denying biological sex, or by simply ignoring this issue. Harms that are very much affecting Wyoming. Take, for example, the Kolstad family, Rock Springs teacher Ashley Willie, or the UW Kappa sisters. In 2024, I co-founded Protect Kids Colorado, a broad coalition of concerned parents, grandparents, teachers, doctors, LGBs, Democrats, Republicans, and everyone in between. After this exact same bill was killed upon arrival in the radical Colorado legislature, we came together from all walks of life to run this exact same law as a citizens ballot initiative. We had nearly 80,000 conversations all over the state, and what we discovered is that nearly every voting citizen completely agrees with it. I personally met people who I fundamentally disagree with on just about everything, but this issue brought us together. Because most people acknowledge the fundamental truth that sex is immutable and there are significant biological differences between males and females. It is not hateful nor bigoted to acknowledge this. This isn't a partisan issue or even a remote issue. Running the ballot initiative led to so many young girls and parents reaching out with their own personal stories. But even if it was remote, one girl like Peyton McNabb being permanently injured by a biological male is one too many. One collegiate athlete like Riley Gaines having her trophy stolen is one too many. One volleyball player like Brooke Slesser having her life threatened by her own teammate just for speaking up that she was uncomfortable is one too many. No one wants anyone to be left out. We just acknowledge that females deserve safety and fairness in their single-sex spaces. So often we see young girls being forced to stand up for themselves, but it shouldn't be up to them to self-advocate. It's up to us, the adults, to do the right thing by them. Due to illegal action from our title board and well-funded NGOs, including hiring lawyers to sue us to the Supreme Court to prevent signature gathering, we didn't quite make the ballot in Colorado. But you have a chance to do the right thing here in Wyoming. Please protect the most vulnerable in this state. I encourage a yes vote on Senate File 44. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I didn't catch your name again.
Erin Lee.
Erin, does anyone have any questions for Ms. Lee? Okay, thank you so much for your testimony. Thanks for making the trip up. Any other public testimony today? Anyone else in the room? I think we have a few people online, so we'll get to them next. Welcome, everyone. Please state your name, even though we may know some of you.
Hello, Madam Chairwoman. My name is Nyoka Erickson, and I'm here speaking for myself as a citizen of Albany County for about 27 years now. I have been playing women's flat track roller derby since 2016, and it's been one of the most important communities people I've met in my life. I also played boys hockey as a teenager because there was no girls team in Laramie. And I did eventually get to play girls hockey in Laramie because we did eventually get a team back. I also played a couple of years at the UW's women hockey team when I was in undergrad. Because of these experiences in these sports, I am here to ask you to vote no on this bill. If you're not familiar with flat track roller derby, just to give you some context, it is a contact sport. It is played on roller skates on a flat oval track. It is mostly played by women. There are no professional leagues, but there is intense competition and very high levels of athleticism at the higher levels of the sport. And this includes at the highest levels of WFDA, the organization that I have played under for all 8 years that I have been playing. Trans women have been able to play derby under WFDA rules for almost 10 years now with no restrictions. I've played many games against trans women who are openly trans, likely games against women I didn't know were trans, but many games against many cis women because again, there's a lot of cis women who play roller derby. I don't think it's appropriate for the state to tell sporting organizations what their policies should be on this issue. I additionally, because of my experiences, believe that trans women do belong in women's sports. It's not just sports. It's one of the most important parts of my life for basically my whole life. And so I'm asking you to not extend this policy to the collegiate level, to not spend any more time on this. There's other issues that I wish the state of Wyoming would work on to protect me, and this is not one of them. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Questions for Mrs. Erickson? Ms. Erickson, yes, go ahead, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Erickson, for your testimony today. You mentioned an organization that oversees this, and I think it was WFDA, was that what it was? Which is a great acronym.
Yes, so that stands for Women's Flat Track Derby Association. And to give you some context, there's 250 WFDA member leagues in the US and then a couple hundred more in other countries.
And Madam Chairman, it seems like they've managed this. They listened to their membership, they worked as a community, they made decisions based on that community of what was appropriate for competition within that sport. And from your perspective, that was an appropriate solution as opposed to having the government of the state of Wyoming or the US government or any other government come in and tell WFDA how they should or shouldn't engage in their activities. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, that is a fair assessment.
So to conclude, it sounds like you don't feel like the state of Wyoming really needs to step in on this one, take control, take the heavy hand of government and tell the WFDA organization how it should make its decisions for the sport.
That's correct. Madam Chairwoman, if I may add a little bit of additional context, this bill would not directly affect our organization because it's not a collegiate organization.
Thank you for your testimony. Any
Thank you,
other
Madam Chair.
follow-ups? Okay, great, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you, committee. My name is Sarah Burlingame. I'm the Executive Director of Wyoming Equality. We are opposed to this bill, but it is good to be in front of this committee today. I just want to touch on 2 points. I think we all know where this bill is going, straight to the top. But it is important that this conversation is brought into the public conversation. And I hope that it will lead to a robust conversation amongst folks who really are interested in fairness and who are really interested in knowing what the law says right now about this. So first, I would note that I think that there's extremism on both sides of this. And a lot of people in my position don't acknowledge that there is extremism on the left, but Wyoming Equality has always been very vocal in naming what we see as some short-sightedness. So on the left, sometimes we hear that any athlete, irrespective of physical superiority, that can only be accounted for by the sex that they were assigned at birth, shouldn't have to do anything at all. And this is not a mainstream view, but it's an extremist one. Some folks might insist that any accounting for hormone levels or a metric that asks trans athletes to align with hormone levels commensurate with cisgender girls is unacceptable. That's an extreme position, and it doesn't reflect reality, and it creates an unfair playing field. We acknowledge that. And so we've resisted this extremism in Wyoming, K through 12 and the university. But on the right, we have bills like this, and bills like this relegate all transgender athletes to the bench, and that's not where they belong. Bills like this insist that it is immaterial that a transgender girl has satisfied the requirements, that she has taken the intensive steps to ensure that her hormones and her strength will fall within the same range as her cisgender counterparts. And instead, we fan the flames of misinformation, and we've seen a lot in Wyoming. We heard just this year that a transgender athlete had an unbelievable striking capability. And I stress the word unbelievable. They were attributing speeds and power not attainable by professional male players, and it led to panic and hysteria, despite the fact that it was false. This rejection of all transgender female athletes, it is another form of extremism. And how has Wyoming traditionally handled this? We've kept our eye on the ball. That is a sports metaphor. And in this case, that ball is fairness. So it isn't fair for transgender athletes to compete without accounting for hormones and strength. Okay, but it also isn't fair to exclude all transgender athletes. And the way we handled this for a decade at the K through 12 level, and Madam Chairwoman and I know she's sick of hearing this from me, but we said, here in Wyoming, we know it's so important that athletes get to play. We know that it's not just about awards, it's not just about medals, it's about teamwork. It's about learning how to fail. It's about learning how to, have skills that you are not going to find anywhere else. You're certainly not in an office, certainly not in most people's day jobs. That sports is the one place where we do this. And it's so crucial that we're going to try to encourage everybody we can to get on that field, get on that rink. But we're also a fair people, and we're going to say, hey, if you have an advantage that can only be accounted for by the sex that you were assigned at birth, and we think it's not fair to someone else and you might do damage, we're going to ask you to account for that. That is a fair position. That is a position that takes into account that transgender people have always existed in Wyoming. Always, always, always. Before we were Wyoming, we had Two-Spirit people. This land has always had transgender people. They have always played in sports. And so we would just suggest that there are some amendments that could help this bill create more fairness. And if the chairwoman was amenable, anything that said that the default was the ability to play unless there was an unfair advantage, in which case, absolutely. Create that fairness. That's what we do in Wyoming. And the final thing that I'll make real quick is that, Section 10 of the Wyoming Constitution does say no discrimination between pupils, and none of the public schools so established and maintained shall distinction or discrimination be made on account of sex, race, or color. And while there was some ambiguity about when we say you shall not discriminate on the basis of sex, is that inclusive of gender identity or sexual orientation, or do we simply mean male versus female? And the Bostock decision was definitive, and it said it absolutely is inclusive of gender identity and sexual orientation. So we think that this bill fails to take that into account. And I'd stand for any questions.
Questions for Ms. Burlingame? Thank you for your testimony. I will say this, that I did have a default in the other legislation, and I thought about it. I thought long and hard about it. Should I have one? Should I include one in here? And I didn't. But certainly hit me up later, and we can discuss this if this moves forward, and who knows? Maybe there's something we can come together with, so. Thank
Madam
you so much.
Chairwoman, I'm happy to hit you up.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Others in the room that would like to testify? Welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman, Committee. Thank you for allowing us to testify today. My name is Patricia McCoy, and I am the Chapter Chair for Moms for Liberty of Laramie County, and I am here to speak on behalf of all 5 chapters that we have throughout the state, as well as our members. We are for this bill without amendments. Our women and young girls should not be forced to compete against biological males, losing out on opportunities and achievements to the biological males who want to be women. We are Wyoming. We are the equality state. We were the first to give women the right to vote. We were the first to protect women's rights and vote in the first female governor. We have been a beacon for women's rights and protection since 1869. Now it seems as though we can no longer seem to define what a woman is, and we have taken a back seat on protecting our women, their sports and their designated women's restrooms, and even their sororities. We currently have 2 lawsuits with the U.S. Supreme Court brought by the states West Virginia and Idaho, not Wyoming. In BPJ versus West Virginia State Board of Education, West Virginia and Idaho are asking the Supreme Court to hear the cases of female athletes who are seeking to protect women's sports. While we did join the Title IX lawsuit as a state, and we are proud of that, we have since taken a back seat instead of being the leader for women's rights that we were. We now play defense and catch up instead of playing offense and putting in the work to protect our girls. Even the federal government is now beginning to pass bills through the House to protect women's sports. Why aren't we? This bill is much needed to begin protecting our women and girls. We have seen in our very own state the effect that can come from allowing biological males into women's sports and spaces. We have had to watch our support our UW Cowgirls as they were forced to forfeit multiple games against an opposing team to protect our players from competing against a biological male on the other team. They never should have had to make that choice. We should have been there to protect them. There are co-ed sports and teams available that trans athletes could participate in, or they can compete in the sport as assigned by birth. We 100% support the passing of this bill. It is about time that Wyoming reclaimed leadership in our country for the protection of women's rights as we have done since 1869. And I would like to thank Chairwoman Schuler for your continued dedication to try to keep bringing this legislative back for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. McCoy? Yes, go ahead, Senator Rothos.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. McCoy, for being here for testimony. Appreciate that. You know, one of the concerns I've had with this legislation as we've seen this advance is how much rhetoric and discussion there is about protecting women's access to sports from communities that I honestly haven't heard vocal about protecting women's access to sports previously. And you know, there are funding issues, there are equity issues. You know, compare the football team at any school versus the women's volleyball team at that school, and there are significant legitimate concerns related to Title IX and equity in every institution I could probably name, right? We see it, we hear about it. What else has your organization stepped up on in terms of ensuring that our women have access to high quality athletic experiences and equity with the male counterparts? What other aspects have you all focused on?
Ms. McCoy?
Thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you, Senator Rothfuss. That's a very excellent question. Our organization has testified before on previous bills supporting the protection of women's sports, including the one at the elementary and high school levels. We also have been reaching out to the University of Wyoming to try and see what information we could get and how we could be supportive of protecting our women and girls. We've also been speaking to our local school districts in the counties that we are represented in to try and see how we could work with the school districts to ensure that that happens as well.
Quick follow-up, Madam Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Is that specifically though with transgender rights issues, or is that more broadly? Because and it is possible, as Madam Chairman noted, this could potentially be an issue in the state of Wyoming. We could have transgender athletes playing at our college or university, but none of us can name that. And honestly, I don't know of any. But I do know, because I've heard direct complaints from high school after high school and from the colleges and from athletes all over the state, that there are significant real disparities in place right now between how our male athletes are treated and the resources that are available to them and their access to athletics, and our women athletes at all levels. That's now, that's continuous, that's everywhere. And that's what I hear factual concerns raised to. And so what I'm asking isn't, where else are you working on transgender related issues regarding access to athletics? But, are you out there fighting to ensure that our women's softball teams are funded?
Yeah, oh, sorry.
Ms. McCoy?
Thank you, Chairwoman Schuler. Thank you, Senator Rothfuss. My apologies. Yes, we are active in all of our communities in trying to ensure that there's proper funding, as well as equipment that may be needed. Like, for example, the volleyball team. They won't need as much equipment as the football team, but they still have equipment and gear that they need, and they should have that available to them. So yes, Senator, we do look at all aspects of everything that goes into women and girls athletics, and we try to push and get the funding as well.
Great, thank you, I'm glad to hear that.
Of course.
Any other questions for Ms. McCoy? Okay, thanks. Anyone else in the room that would like to testify, please come forward. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Kirk Young. I'm the president of Western Wyoming Community College. I've been there 6 months, so my first opportunity to be here. And so I thank you for the discussion today. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here representing our Community College Commission. And I appreciate the conversation that has taken place today and the consideration on this topic. As has been discussed, it is a complex topic, and it is something that has been on our radar for a long time. I just moved here from New York. That's where I've worked for the last 10 years. And it is something, obviously, that we've been discussing and dealing with there. As you had stated, Madam Chair, we have, both where I came from and here, we have looked constantly to the NJCAA for guidance on this. And as you stated as well, they've been silent on the topic. And for that, it causes some complexity in the way that we administer and interact in our intercollegiate athletics. With that, I do want to thank you for the discussion that has happened today. A couple of questions that I had coming in have already been discussed by you, Senator Rothfuss and Senator Scott. One being, how do we handle a situation when we have a team from another state that comes in? This was the situation that happened at the university. How do we manage that? When we first looked at this bill, I looked for and maybe hoped to see some guidance. When it came to that, I recognize that that's very complicated and difficult to do. As I think you stated in the response to Senator Scott, you'll look to the schools to administer that and to make that determination. We continue to look to the NJCAA for guidance on that. Hopefully we'll be able to receive some guidance from them here shortly. So with that, I wanted to come here today, thank you for this discussion, let you know that this is something that we are very much cognizant of, something that is on our radar and something that we're discussing continually. When it comes to our student athletes, it's imperative that we do everything we can to support every one of them. I thank you for the question that was just brought up about fairness in intercollegiate athletics between male and female sports. That's something that's very important to us. Title IX provides a lot of guidance when it comes to that. We are constantly under federal guidance when it comes to that. They're making sure that we abide by the laws, which is something we're committed to doing anyway. So we support our student athletes in every way. We, of course, will abide by the laws of the state of Wyoming. And I wanted to be here today to be able to represent the commission, let you know that we're grateful for this discussion. And I'm happy to stand for any questions that you might have at this time.
Could you state your name again? I missed it.
Yeah, it's Kirk Young,
Kirk Young.
K-I-R-K.
Okay. Welcome to Western Wyoming. You're in my neck of the woods. So,
I am, yes.
And you've got some big shoes to fill with
Yes.
Dr. Dell, so welcome.
Thank you.
Questions for him? No? Yes, oh, go ahead, Senator.
I'm a little unclear. Are you supporting the bill or opposing it?
Currently, as the bill stands, we did have the questions that were brought forward earlier with both how do we administer the bill and the other questions that had come forward with that. At this time, we would support the bill and support the state of Wyoming in the regulation that's proposed here in this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Young, you know, just because there's a problem doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a law to solve that problem. We see everything. We've got a hammer, and we always, regardless of what tools needed, we hit it with a hammer. You mentioned that you were working with the NJCAA and that you've been working with the community colleges. It sounds like you're already engaged in trying to address the concerns that have been raised. My question for you is, do you feel that it's appropriate at this time for us to be passing laws about it and coming up with one-size-fits-all solution that dictates across the board, this is how it will be done in the state of Wyoming? Or do you feel like it's more advantageous for our students to let you work with the NJCAA and kind of keep it a local solution?
Mr. Young?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Senator Rothfuss, that's a good question. I would say from my personal perspective, and I'll be responding not on behalf of the commission at this point, I would lean in favor of your latter point there, that we continue to look to the direction that we receive from the NJCAA, and would prefer the opportunity to look to them and abide by their guidance. Part of the reason for that really has to do with the intercollegiate nature of what we're doing. It's really challenging for us when we look at competition with student athletes from other states. And so if the NJCAA could help us with some guidance on how we would handle that nationally, and our competition between students from other states, I would prefer that we receive that kind of guidance and that kind of direction. I felt that and I think as has been alluded to earlier, it put our students at the university in a tough situation where they were affected adversely. They're competing for championships and other things, and they had to forfeit a game because there was no guidance from the national organization. So I would say, speaking for me personally, I would hope to receive some guidance from the national organizations rather than needing, as you stated, a one-size-fits-all, perhaps, law that would govern this.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And, I think the women's team, realistically, for the University of Wyoming, I think while the paper shows them as having a record of 17-13, I think they've got a record of 17-11, and the Wyoming legislature candidly has an 0-2 record in volleyball games this season. Because were it not for us, they would have played both those games and potentially won them. We don't know. But I appreciate that answer about having the flexibility to try and work with your community and make the decisions. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Young? Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate
very
it.
much.
It's nice to get to see a
Yeah.
face with the new,
It's good to be here.
with the new
Thank you.
director over there, present, I mean. Any other folks in the room that would like to testify? I know we have some folks online. At least, I think they're still there, aren't they?
Yes,
wanna-
Madam Chairman, they are.
You want to
have
bring them
3
in?
online.
Anybody
Absolutely.
that is still around, we'd love to hear from them.
Madam Chairman, we will start with Naomi Nye. They are
Okay.
joining the room now.
Okay. Welcome. Please introduce yourself and tell us what you want us to know.
Thank you, committee members. My name is Naomi Nye, and I represent the legislative department of the nonprofit organization Gays Against Groomers. I am here today to respectfully urge your yes vote on SF 044, the Fairness in Sports Intercollegiate Athletic Bill. We often are told that the idea of equity, diversity, and inclusivity are ideals that are compassionate and beneficial to all. However, what we are seeing in reality is that girls and young women are repeatedly being harmed by the imposition of gender ideology in our schools, campuses, and sports. Under the guise of inclusivity and sensitivity towards transgender individuals, women and girls are being deprived of medals, awards, scholarships, academic recognition, and ultimately career and economic opportunities. The reality is that biological sex matters in sports. Numerous studies on athletic performance demonstrates that boys outperform girls in physical activities as early as age 6, with the performance gap widening as they grow. Ignoring these undeniable biological differences places female athletes at risk. Consider the case of Peyton McNabb, which was mentioned earlier, a high school volleyball player from North Carolina who suffered a traumatic brain injury and partial paralysis after being spiked in the head by her transgender opponent. Her dreams of earning a college volleyball scholarship was ended in an instant. I can list over a dozen of these heartbreaking cases. Where is the compassion for these girls? SF0044 is not about exclusion. It is about protecting fairness, safety, and opportunities for female athletes. By passing this bill, you are ensuring that women and girls retain the level playing field they deserve in sports. I respectfully urge you to vote yes on SF044 to protect female athletes and uphold the integrity of women's sports. Thank you for your time and your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Nye. Is there any questions from the committee? Okay, thank you again for your testimony.
Thank you.
Is there a Macy that's online?
Madam Chairman, they are entering the room now.
Okay, I got a note that that person might have to leave early to get to work, so let's go ahead and bring her in.
Hello.
Welcome. Introduce yourself.
My name is Macy Boggs, and this year marked my final season on the University of Wyoming women's volleyball team. I'm here today in support of the Senate File 44, providing fairness for women and girls in sports. Women and girls of all ages need and deserve access to fair competition without the threat or concern of male athletes taking our spots. During my last season at Wyoming, my team was punished with 2 losses for refusing to play against a male athlete on an opposing team, an injustice that ultimately kept us from competing in the Mountain West Conference tournament. I was stripped of the chance to play my final collegiate matches because we faced a situation no woman should ever have to face. Either compete against a team rostering a male athlete on a women's scholarship, robbing us of fair and safe competition, or forfeit the rest of our season. No female athlete should ever be put in such a position. Women work hard to win, to improve, and to be their best. We deserve to compete against athletes whose biology matches our own, not against a male standard. We deserve to compete with integrity, safety, and the confidence of knowing we're competing on a level playing field against other women. I am now suing the Mountain West Conference alongside 5 women from other universities to ensure this never happens to the next generation of female athletes. While it may be too late for me to finish my career at Wyoming on the terms my team earned, it's not too late for the young girls coming up behind us. I'll stand boldly and unapologetically for the truth, especially when it comes to protecting women's sports. Every cell in our body bears witness to our God-given identity. No scientific or medical intervention can alter the DNA and biology that define whether we are male or female. It is fundamentally unfair, unsafe, and a violation of women's rights to force female athletes to compete with or against biological males. My stance is rooted in evidence-based facts. Natal males have inherent physical advantages in women's sports, regardless of how they identify or what treatments they undergo. Sex is determined by birth, biology, and genetics, not by feelings or, not by feelings or identities. It's time for policymakers to take a stand and ensure that women's sports remain a space where girls can learn that they deserve fairness and the opportunity to become champions. No woman in the state of Wyoming should have her athletic career cut short because a male athlete robbed her of earned opportunities. My team was told we didn't deserve safety on the court, that we weren't important enough for fair competition, and that women should remain silent for the benefit of men, even at their own expense. This issue is much bigger than wins and losses. It's about whether or not we respect women and girls. I implore you to stop this injustice and preserve the future of female athletics. Please vote yes today. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Macy. Anybody that has questions for Ms. Boggs? Okay, thank you so much for taking the time out today. I hope you're not late for work. I
No,
heard that there was a little
worth it.
issue. Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, you
still
have
have some others?
one more. Aaron Friday is joining the room now.
Okay.
Sorry, good morning.
Good morning. Go ahead. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Erin Friday. I am the president of Our Duty, a nonpartisan nonprofit in Wyoming that protects children and vulnerable adults from the gender industry. I am also an attorney and a mother of a daughter who used to believe that she was a boy, but she outgrew her rejection of her natural body. Males do not belong in girls' sports. According to a recent UN report, over 600 female athletes in more than 400 competitions have lost more than 890 medals in 29 different sports as of March of 2024 to trans-identified males. We all watched in horror as two male boxers beat the hell out of female boxers at this year's Olympics. 4 males at the Davis High School in California who have joined girls' teams have impacted a whopping 195 female athletes. You mentioned Riley Gaines, and I will mention Paula Scanlon. Both of these women trained their entire lives just to have a 6'1" man beat them. In the case of Riley Gaines, she tied him, but because of public relations, he was given the first position. Not only did Will, AKA Leah Thomas, subject them to humiliation on the podium, but it was a double humiliation because he watched them while they were naked, contorting their bodies in embarrassing positions in order to get on their tight swimming gear. Men identifying as women are taking female positions on teams, podiums, and medals. A male identifying woman, Blair Fleming, is firing volleyballs with forces that no female athlete can achieve. It's almost impossible to find one sport in which men have not invaded women's spaces, conquering women from billiards to golf to skiing to biking to weightlifting and on and on. It is unfair and dangerous to permit males, regardless of their hormone levels or surgical procedures, to compete as females in sports. Because after all, a woman is not merely a hormone. Females cannot be created except when a sperm and egg meet, and nothing, no medical procedure in the world can change a male to be a female. It should be noted that men identifying as women have been offered third options, that is a transgender category, and they resoundingly decline. This is because they get a thrill from beating women, both figuratively and literally. Nothing in this bill prevents trans-identifying men from playing sports. They just need to play based on their biology. I wanted to quickly address some of the issues that were raised by Senator Rothfuss and you, Madam Chairman. Title IX regulations, if you look at them, require that for funding, that schools do not discriminate based on sex. Sex is defined biologically. It does not include gender identity. Even the Bostock ruling does not state that. So that was a misstatement by one of the witnesses here. The regulations also permit girls to try out on boys' teams if there is not a existing similar team for the girls to play on. So you will not be in violation of equal protection whatsoever. I request that this panel read the recent case called State of Tennessee versus Cardona. This is a district court case that goes through the history of Title IX, goes through the regulations, and makes it very clear what the definition of sex is under Title IX, and the relationship with the Bostock case. So I encourage this panel, and I encourage Wyoming to always keep the North Star to be truth and reality. Women are different than men. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Friday. Are there questions from the committee? Okay, thank you so much for your testimony. Appreciate it. Anyone else online?
No, Madam Chairman.
Okay. All right, if there's no other testimony, we'll close public testimony. What's the pleasure of the committee?
Madam Chairman, move the bill.
Okay. So been moved by Senator Scott, seconded by Senator Olson. Any amendments or anything that you'd like to take a look at in the bill? Yes, go ahead, Senator.
One thing with regard to amendments, it comes down to the athletic competition definition and whether that should be narrowed. And I have some potential language if it wants to be intercollegiate, and that would be to change it so that it reads athletic competition means any intercollegiate athletic competition between two teams or persons. And then you could include the rest or not include the rest. I don't know what the rest does, but that's a potential suggestion that I don't know if the rest of the committee would be interested in, but I can make that motion if there's interest.
Discussion on the comment, the amendment, potential amendment?
If that's the intent.
Okay. Go ahead, Senator.
Madam Chairman, I'm happy to make that motion. See, so we're inserting intercollegiate before athletic, and then instead of display, I don't know why it's display, change that to competition. I guess, never mind. I see why it's display. It's probably because of the word competition, and nobody likes to use the same word twice in the definition.
Leave display alone then.
Even though it's awkward, leave display
Okay.
alone. So means any intercollegiate athletic competitions.
Okay. Any comment on that amendment?
Sorry, Madam Chairman, just to clarify, are you leaving display or changing it to competition?
Madam Chairman, it would be leave display. I get the point now, even though it's a weird word.
Okay, sounds good, thank you.
Yep, so only insert intercollegiate before athletic.
Actually, I think it's a good fix, because that was the intent. So I think that narrows it down a little bit, which is what I think we need to do, so. Any other comments? Okay. All those in favor of that amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed by the same? Okay, that amendment's passed. Any other amendments? Question on the bill? Yes, go ahead, Senator.
My thoughts briefly, I'm going to be a no on the bill, and it really does come down to the fact that I think this is an ongoing struggle that needs thoughtfulness and communities to work based on special circumstances and find a way on a, honestly, probably a sport by sport basis to figure out what the right approach is. An outright ban does end up being discriminatory in circumstances where it would be appropriate for a transgender individual to be competing and doing so fairly and safely. This is one of those instances where, I understand there is a lot of outcry. We heard a lot of that outcry, and we definitely have something that needs to be addressed. I agree with you on that. It needs to be addressed. But this takes it out of the hands of the folks that have the time to address it, and that is the NCAA and the NJCAA, and those communities specifically that know their athletics the best. can work this through, and it's not going to be easy. It's clearly not going to be easy, right? This is a challenge. But I feel like in the spirit of equality and equity and access to athletics, we need to do the hard work instead of the easy approach, where the easy approach is the hammer. The easy approach is thou shalt, and we pick a side and we pick the winner. These communities can do it. And when I talk to our athletics directors, when I talk to the coaches, they're all concerned about it, but none of them really want a thou shalt. They want to keep working on it and figure out what the right solution is. So I don't think it's time for us to pass laws. And again, maybe it's the, small government guy in me. I like to I like to try and keep the government out of things if we don't need the government, and I feel like we don't need the government this time.
Thank you, Senator Rothfuss. Senator Scott, did you want to say something?
Madam Chairman, on and for the bill, it seems to me that we've just got to recognize that our species has significant sexual dimorphism that is relevant to athletic competition, and that we are, if we allow the mixing of men and women in these things, where the men have a significant physical advantage just because of the way we are, it's just not fair, and it's depriving the women athletes of experience and opportunities that they ought to have. And I think this bill is just basic common sense. I don't see anything difficult to work through. I think you can just use a little common sense. We're the ones that make the laws, and this one, the common sense is being abused and the law is needed.
Any other comments? Okay, I do appreciate both Senator Rothfuss and Senator Scott's remarks, and like I said before, I wish the NCAA and the NJCAA would have taken care of these issues a year or two ago when they started, coming to the forefront, and they haven't. And, I do believe the same thing, that sometimes the hammer from the top isn't always the best way to go, but I just think ultimately, as a former collegiate athlete, female athlete, I felt like I just needed to continue to make sure that our biological females are supported in every way we can, and so this was my effort to do that. So at that point, let's go ahead and take roll.
Madam Chairman, on Senate File 44, Fairness in Sports Intercollegiate Athletics, do pass as amended. Senator Brennan?
Aye.
Senator Olson?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss?
No.
Senator Scott?
Aye.
Chairwoman Schuler?
Aye.
4 ayes, 1 no.
Thank you. This bill is passed. I'm wondering, do we have time for the next one? What do you think? We got 20 minutes. I'll leave it up to Senator Brennan. Should we give it a shot? Okay, we have one more bill then. And let me pull it up. I've got it here somewhere close, right here. So we'll go ahead and take a look. Senate File 72, Summer Vacation Preservation Act. And this is a bill that Senator Brennan will bring forth. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. This is a Summer Vacation Preservation Act. What this bill essentially does is it gives summer vacation back to our students and our teachers. If we go on to page 2 of the bill, in lines 9 through 12, we'll see that what this bill asks to do is that, I'm just going to read it. Approve or disapprove alternates, this is the board, this is for the State Board of Education, that districts need to commence basically commence a school year before Labor Day, that they cannot commence before Labor Day, and they have to recess before Memorial Day. This section talks about that they can ask for a alternate schedule if they want. We strike 175 days of the schools operating down to 165 days for the schools operating. On page 3, this is where we talk about that, again, that we need to go start school after Labor Day, be done before Memorial Day. Again, where we have 175 days, we take it to 165 days. On page 4, currently, all schools need to operate for 185 days. We take that down to a whole total of 170 days. And then on section 3, page 5, one of the concerns we heard last year with this bill was that teachers' salaries could be changed. We don't want to do that because the belief is that teachers get paid for educating our kids, not the number of days or hours that they work. So this says that no school district shall decrease any teacher's salary as a result of this act.
Anything else?
That's the substance of the bill.
Oh, all right. Senator Brennan's not wasting any time getting to the bottom of this. So let's go ahead and see if there's any questions from the committee. Yes, Senator Scott.
Yes, Madam Chairman, my question is, how, if you assume a 5-day work week, how many days are there typically between Labor Day and Memorial Day that are available? So that we can judge whether we need to decrease the number of days the way this bill does.
Senator Brennan, any idea? Oh, somebody's got their calculator out, so.
Madam Chairman,
Yes,
I
go
did
ahead,
this
Senator
calculation
Loftus.
last year, and I forgot the answer to that question.
I have the answer to that.
Okay, go ahead. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Nathan Tajeski. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for the Wyoming Department of Ed. I put some information just in case you guys wanted it. We don't necessarily have a position, but assuming normal breaks, holidays, you have about 172 days available. That does not include, certain districts will have traditional days that they include, like a full week for Thanksgiving for some. Not everybody takes that. That's not included in that 172, but it is 172 days between on a normal year.
Thank you for that. Yeah, Senator Brennan, do you want to comment on it?
Thank
Or
you.
Senator Rothfuss? No? Okay, go ahead.
My only comment would be that, yes, last year we did the math. You'll also notice that we did not, the number of hours that a student is in their seat, instructive hours, is set by the Wyoming Department of Education. That's set by them. There's nothing that we touch in this bill that changes that, and we did the calculations to make sure that they could get the number of seat hours into that 165 days.
I have one, just one question, Senator. I know last year I had visited with a couple of folks in my county. They weren't a big fan of the bill, but they liked the idea of local control, being able to do their own schedules. And so I do like the fact that you've put in here that there's an option for them to go ahead and do an alternate schedule if they'd like. Was there any pushback from any other districts in terms of taking out some of the teacher development days or professional development days? Or districts changing maybe how they do their professional development? Or had you heard anything from last year?
I don't believe last year that we heard a great concern about the teacher development days. I don't think we did in.
Okay. I just wondered about that. I know, I'm sure teachers would be really okay with taking out a few of them, quite frankly, but. And making the same amount of money. And making the same amount of money, yes. Other comments or questions? Yes. Go ahead, Senator Olson first, and then we'll come.
Mine's just a little one. On the effective date, why is it postponed out to 2026 versus starting for this August school year? Or September, it'd be September.
Senator Brennan?
I don't have a good answer to that. I would be totally fine with amending that to 2025.
Okay.
Follow-up? Okay, Senator Rothfuss?
I think the reason was that they prepare their schedules for the school year out a year ahead, basically, and have everything planned that far in advance. That's not to say they couldn't get together and replan. I'm not saying it's impossible by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that's what it comes down to, is that lead planning. We probably have some school folks that could provide us with more insight in that. And Madam Chairman, just kind of echoing some support of the legislation. We did take a look at this last year, looked around what other states had. Many other states have a minimum number of days, in fact, of 160.
Oh.
But that doesn't mean they implement, or the districts only go to 160. Many of them will end up at 180. It's a school district decision, 175, whatever the case may be. I don't think we saw any above 180. I believe that was the highest we saw. So the flexibility that we see in the Romanet 8 paragraph on page 2 is essential, where we understand that school districts may have alternative schedules. We know Teton County, for example, likes a 2-week spring break. You're going to have to request an exception, but there's no intent to make it hard to have an exception if you have a justification for it. It's just the idea that, Senator Brennan and I were talking about how do we bring joy back to school and make sure that we're not burning our kids out. And my kids personally, in their first few years, loved school, and they sort of lost the love for it over time, and I tend to see that. And frankly, I feel responsible for quite a bit of that through a lot of the work that I've done in the Education Committee, where we've dramatically, in my opinion, improved the quality of education in the state of Wyoming. We've done great things. Our rigor has improved, our testing has improved, everything has improved, and we're one of the top education systems in the country. But we seem to have traded some of the joy and fun part of the education system. And one of the ways that we can give that back is honestly just giving back time and making sure that we're not trying to compress the summer away because we just don't have enough time to teach. And we talked about, well, how can we scale that back? And this was the way to make it very clear that flexibility exists, and that the default school year should leave a summer between, Memorial Day and Labor Day. And that if you want to do things differently, and you've got good reason, by all means, you're a school district, make your choices. But that default, dialing the default to a certain position, is the meaningful point that this bill does. And I'd like to see it play out for a few years and see how it changes things. There are other secondary reasons which I think are important. We've heard concerns about the compressed summer, just from a summer job standpoint and a tourism standpoint. There are a lot of concerns that I've heard, and we've all heard anecdotally just from constituents, about what are we doing starting school this early? What are we doing staying in school this late? So this is part of the Joy of Learning effort that I'm certainly passionate about now. I want to find ways to make sure that as our seniors are graduating high school, they still love learning. And a big part of that is from a mental health standpoint, not having to always be at school.
Excellent comments, Senator. Let's go ahead and open it up for public. I'm sure Department of Education, maybe, do you folks have anything you'd like to add, or no? Okay, perfect. Well, anyone else from the public? I know we're getting kind of close on time, so. Go
Thank
ahead.
you, Madam Chairwoman. I will try to be as quick as possible for you guys. I'm taking off one hat and putting on my mom hat for this one. I was preparing to come and speak as a mom to you on this bill, in support of this bill. But my youngest son got so excited that this bill was finally coming. Him and his sister worked together last night to put together a statement, which I have also emailed to you all if we run out of time. But I'd like to read from that for you, just so you could have a student's perspective on this bill. He says, "Dear Senators, For many years, I watched all 4 of my siblings go through the difficulty of middle school and high school before I got the chance to experience it. As the youngest sibling out of 4 kids, my siblings had to go through a lot of things I didn't have to because they wanted to make a difference for me. Although I don't have a younger sibling, I want to make a change for the kids who will come to South High or any other high school after me. One of the main changes I want to make is the extension of summer vacation. While most people think summer vacation is just an excuse to lay around all day or ignore everything we've learned in school, it's completely different. Just like how people take vacations from work or have 1 to 2 days off every week, it is important to have a reset and take time for yourself to help your physical, emotional, and mental health. My older sister, who had struggled mentally all throughout high school, always told me that no matter what was going on, what assignment I had to submit or the homework I would miss, none of it was as important as my mental health. School has changed a lot over the years. Even though my sister graduated a year before I started my freshman year, the changes were evident, and it was clear in how exhausted I had become, how distant I was from my friends and family, and how I wished time would go by faster so I could just leave school and go home. While I know most people don't see the importance in extending summer break or think that summer break is long enough as it is, I have broken down how many days of the off we get a year compared to how much time we spend at school every year for 13 years. This school year, the first day of school was August 26th, and the year is set to end on June 4th. That is 10 months out of the 12 months we have in a year. There are 66 days of school before a 5-day break for Thanksgiving, including the weekend. There are 15 days of school before Christmas break, which is 16 days, including the weekends. There are 59 days of school before a 6-day break for spring break, including the weekend. Finally, there are 42 days of school before summer vacation. Now, for most, these days and the breaks in between seem reasonable. But if you break it down, that means that per school year, not including snow days added on, we are at school for 182 days out of 365 days in a year. That's equivalent to 2,366 days of school in 13 years out of 4,745 days in those years. That means that between the ages of 5 and 18, we spend 50% of our lives in school for 13 years. Again, I know it doesn't seem like much for most people, especially since all of us had to do it and survived without any break extension or anything else. But what comes after high school? Straight to the workforce for most people, like my siblings, working every day of the week, having 1 to 2 days off and trying to work overtime to have enough hours for paid time off. And that doesn't include the people like my older sister who go to school and work at the same time and have to work during vacations for school or have to do school while using paid time off at work. Or the people who go straight to college after high school, spending 4 years in high school and going straight to a 2 or 4 year college, and even more schooling after that, depending on the degree you choose. I know high school is supposed to teach you about the future and help you in your goals in life, but while doing that, it shouldn't be something that students regret or want to get away from. High school should be fun. It should be about learning new things and getting to relax, enjoy being a kid while you still can. It should be laughter and joy, and all those high school movies were like that everyone watched growing up. You should want to go to school. You should want to come to class and enjoy the environment and teachers that you're around. You should get to enjoy being a kid without being told that's just how life works. We understand that. We see what the future can hold. But if you want to help build a new generation of doctors, nurses, lawyers, athletes, blue-collar workers, and much more, then you should help us to enjoy the time we have left as kids and work to help us become the next generation that runs this world. Thank you for taking the time to read this letter and take into consideration how impactful extending summer vacation can be. Even if it's only a little extension, a little goes a long way. Sincerely, Caden McCoy.
Thank you, Mrs. McCoy. That's amazing. Yeah, please pass on our, what an amazing person. Was it a son or a daughter? I didn't catch.
It was my youngest son,
Youngest
and then
son.
my only daughter helped him.
Okay, yeah, just amazing statement, so thank him very much.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Any questions at all for Ms. McCoy? Okay, anyone else? We've got about 2 minutes. If you can keep it close, we can maybe get this done and get a vote in.
Good morning
Thank you.
again,
Go
Madam Chair,
ahead.
members of the committee, Nick Bellack, Wyoming School Boards Association. I will be very brief. Our essential question is, will this still allow districts the flexibility to still do what is best for their community? Senator Rothfuss, you mentioned some of the varying schedules that are in place, and we have to see these as artifacts of what works for our communities. The second concern we have is around professional development days. As a previous second grade teacher, I know in the midst of what the school year is, I went into a professional development for reading instruction, and it was specifically tasked to help us as teachers work with our kids. So we learned, we practiced, we reflected, we learned, and it was progressive throughout the year. Without that time within the classroom, we wouldn't be afforded the same type of development. You couldn't necessarily just push that into a summer. So just some considerations and concerns we had from the School Boards Association, and I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions for Nick? Okay, thank you so much for your testimony. Anyone else? Okay, let's go ahead and close public testimony. What's your pleasure on the bill? Move the bill by Senator Brennan. Second. We have a second by Senator Rothfuss. Any changes or amendments, anything at all, or just discussion on the bill?
Madam Chairman, I'd have
Yes.
an amendment, but not at this hour.
Okay, maybe a second reading one. Okay, good deal. Well, if there's no amendments, then I guess we will call for the question and take roll call.
Madam Chairman, on Senate File 72, Summer Vacation Preservation Act, do pass. Senator Brennan?
Aye.
Senator Olson?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss? Aye. Senator Scott?
No.
Chairwoman Schuler?
Aye.
4 aye, 1 no.
Thank you, that bill is passed. I guess Senator Brennan, you'll take that up on the floor? All right, great. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Thanks for all your testimony. Look forward to seeing you again on Monday. We'll have 3 more bills to take a look at. Thanks so much. Meeting is adjourned.